of study or partial cost of study. And this will be dependent on whether you're an international student or you're a student living with a disability, or you are financially needy, or you are an exceptional academic achiever. These are our funding partners, ranging from the National Skills Fund, MINDS, DART in Germany, SASOL, ISFEP, and for the Global Knowledge Partnership, where we place doctoral students overseas for anything between 3 to 18 months. We are also partnering with MyTech from Canada, DART in Germany, MINDS. We are looking at placing students in the African continent. We also partner with organizations like Fulbright for placement in America. In terms of how the NRF must support and must advance transformation, 95% of the scholarships will be awarded to South Africans, 5% international, and 55% to women. In terms of the South African aggregate, it's 90% Black, 10% white, and then 1% person with disability. Colleagues, this is a very important slide in that it really explains how the NRF makes its funding decisions. When we make a decision on whom to fund and whom not to fund, these are some of the things that we have to get our head around. For instance, the key thing that I think everyone knows now, it's the availability of the budget. If there's an oversubscription, as there's always been an oversubscription, and my next slide will show you that, it might be that you might not be funded, even though you're an excellent student. Some of the students might be up for uninterrupted support, so they might be funded. But if there's a lot of them under uninterrupted support, and we have limited budget, so we might not fund others. One of the things that is also important is we consider the disciplines that you will have been applying for. If say, for instance, you are going to be considered under the SASOL scholarship, for instance, you have to be in chemistry, in green economy. These are the disciplines that SASOL has an interest in. So those are some of the things that we do consider, colleagues. Again, we look at the postgraduate enrollment at each universities. We know that there are other universities who have a high number of enrollment at masters and doctoral, and other universities have higher enrollment at an honors level. So when we do these awards, you know, there has to be a balancing act taking into consideration the enrollment at the different universities. We're also looking at institutional spread. We don't want the awards only to be concentrated at a particular university. What is also important, it's the geographical area of the applicants. It is important for us not to be focusing on the students that are mostly coming from the metros, but it is also important that we consider students that are coming from the rural municipalities, for instance. This is just a brief overview of the awards that were made in 2023. For the 2023 academic year, you will see that we received just close to about just above 13,000 applications. The number should be more. I think it should be around 14,000 if you consider the other domains in the NRF. And about 27% were funded. 67% of the applicants are without funding, and that is around 8,600. But this number has gone down, I think, now to about 7.5. We have recently made about an additional 1,000 honors awards as a result of an influx of money that has come in from the National Skills Fund. So the numbers might have changed drastically, but once we've bedded in, we'll be able to update these numbers. So this, colleagues, this slide just shows you that in terms of the absorptive capacity for the NRF and the requirement that is there within the universities, and also in terms of the actual breakdown of full cost and partial cost of study, it is also indicated on the slide. In terms of the eligibility, nothing has changed. For honors student, we only fund for a year. And we only fund South African citizens and permanent residents for master's, doctoral, and those that are going for an upgrade. And also for extension support, we fund South African citizens, permanent residents, as well as international students. What is important to note under extension support, you can request your extension support for anything between 6 months or 12 months. But it is important that if you're going to submit an extension support application, you consult with your supervisor heavily, and it's a core decision on what will be best suited, whether is it going to be 6 months or it's going to be 12 months. But the NRF has always been flexible. For instance, if you had applied for 6 months and then you want it to be extended to 12 months, we have always been flexible to accommodate people that come and request their 6 months to be extended to 12 months. But obviously, when we do that at a strain because the budget will have been exhausted. So that's why my plea is that this must be a conversation between the supervisor and the student before submitting that application. In terms of the eligibility for the student, this slide really, colleagues, just demonstrates the fact that we want to shuttle student in between full cost of study and partial cost of study with ease. There has been some teething problems, but once the system has been optimized, we're hoping that we'll be able to shuttle students between full cost and partial cost of study with ease. Once again, only South African citizens and permanent residents will be eligible for full cost of study, whereas international students will only be eligible for partial cost of study. And the whole idea here, colleagues, is that if you enter your scholarship and you're funded at partial cost of study, if you go to masters and then you meet the eligibility criteria for full cost of study, then you should be able to be upgraded, to have your scholarship upgraded to full cost of study. And similarly, if you enter at an honors level at full cost of study and then you don't meet the eligibility criteria for full cost of study when you go to your masters, we should be able to downgrade your scholarship to partial cost of study. In terms of the age eligibility, the NRF has still maintained that the maximum age at application for honors 28 years, masters 30 years, and then doctoral 32 years. And the expectation is that the honors qualification should be completed in 1 year, and then masters should be completed in N+1 and 2 plus N, and then doctoral should be completed 3+1. That will mean that additional extension support. In terms of the exclusions that we do, the NRF doesn't fund undergraduate qualification, regardless of the NQF exit level. So you might be exiting your undergraduate qualification at NQF level 8, which is an equivalent of an honors. You will not be funded because that is regarded as an undergraduate qualification and not a postgrad qualification. Your postgraduate certificate or diplomas, regardless of the NQF exit level, masters by coursework only, and also professional masters and doctoral degrees as well. In terms of the indicative funding values, colleagues will really appreciate the fact that I think we've made huge strides. If you remember 3 years ago, the NRF was only giving honors students 60,000. Master students were getting 90,000, and then doctoral students were only getting 120,000. The numbers are there, they speak for themselves. We have really ramped up these numbers so that they can speak to the full cost of study that is there for students. We've also tried to equalize the partial cost of study so that it's quite reasonable. But obviously, we are limited by the budget in getting to these numbers. What is important here, colleagues, that I just want to draw your attention to is if you look at the partial cost of study for doctoral, this partial cost of study for doctoral, that amount is way less than the partial cost of study at masters and honors. We are still in negotiations internally in making sure that we ramp up that amount so that at least that partial cost of study is either at the same level as honors masters, or it's slightly higher than honors and masters. And we are hoping, if successful, this will be implemented in the next academic year, or in the next, when we publish the next call. We are still going to maintain that annual inflationary increase of the scholarship so that they can keep up with inflation. What we are not able to guarantee so far is the fact that the electronic study device allowance and also the assistive technology device allowance will be increased. But should we get additional money, there will be considerations in increasing these two values. But for now, we will only be increasing just the value of the scholarship itself. One of the things, again, colleagues, that we have seen is that when we upgrade students, like say, for instance, if you were funded last year, if you were funded at the beginning of this year, let's say, for instance, you were funded for extension support for masters, but then you pass your masters, so you don't need that extension anymore. You then come to the NRF, you say, I don't need the extension anymore, I need a full-time doctoral award. We will then convert you to a full-time doctoral award instead of an extension support for masters. But what we have seen is that some of those students, for instance, because we will not have been able to do a financial means test on them, we have then realized that we ought to create space for them so that we can do a financial means test. So those students, we will only be able to submit them for a financial means test between October and November. And that process will close on the 15th of August. You have to just liaise with the research office in terms of the process. There's a consent form that you must complete. And then we get your details. There's a spreadsheet that must be completed as well. And then once we have that information, we will then advance that all of that information to our service provider. And then once we get the outcomes in December, your scholarship might be upgraded in the next academic year. And also, one of the processes that we have instituted, Imitas, and I'm sure the bulk of the COEs and the SACHIs, as well as the other grant holder linked, such as Tutuka, might be happy with the process. After consultations, the NRF has decided to institute an ad hoc application process, but this will only be for students that are going to be funded by research that is supported by the NRF. As I've said, this will be mostly for the SACHIs, for the COEs, and also for the grant holder linked as well. But these students, it must be students that were recruited by the respective supervisors. And these students must either have been recruited at the beginning of the academic year. So this will be 2024 January, for instance, or these are the students that will have been recruited at the beginning of the second semester, 2024. So the idea there is that because they will have missed this call process now, if they are recruited in December, January, for instance, whatever the case might be. So those supervisors can come to the NRF. So how the process starts, the supervisors obviously will have to recruit the student, and then they must then give us the ID numbers of those students. And then once we get the ID numbers of those students, we will then do a close call only to the students that have been recruited by the supervisors. Those students will be linked on the call. Those students will then apply, and then they will submit those applications to the universities. The only thing that the universities are expected to do is to screen the applications only. Please do not review those applications. And then once those applications have been found to be legit in terms of the university screening, they will then be submitted to the NRF. We'll also do just controls on those applications. And if everything is okay, we will then approve those students for funding. However, how are we going to manage the issue of the review? The issue of the review is going to be managed like this. The students will already either have submitted approval of their research to the Higher Degrees Committee. Some of them already might have the outcome of the Higher Degrees Committee, for instance. So at the time of application, if they can submit proof, document type, that indicates that their studies have been approved by the Higher Degrees Committee, then we will then fund them. In the event that at the time of application, they can't submit that proof, they will be expected to submit the proof of the Higher Degrees Committee when they submit the progress report at the end of the year, which is November 2024, for instance. We will then see that on their progress report, and then that will be attached on their files. Now, when is the NRF going to say, for instance, for students that will have been recruited in the first semester, the call, this will be an online call, colleagues, a closed call. That call will open somewhere in January. It will close somewhere in February, about 4 weeks. We will keep the call running even shorter than that. And then we will then give the universities time for them to screen. Once they have screened, they then submit to the NRF on a particular timeline. The NRF will then have about 2 weeks to then manage those applications. So the students that are going to be funded in the first semester, the NRF will notify them by the end of March as to whether their application was successful. Those that will have submitted in the second semester, we will notify them by the end of September. Again, what we are saying with the process is that there's a possibility that you might only be funded at partial cost of study, particularly if you can't produce proof that you were funded by ISFEP or NSFAS, but you will get an opportunity in August for you to be assessed for a financial means test, and then we will then upgrade your scholarship in December if you were found to be financially needy. In terms of the timelines for the call, what is important to note, colleagues, is that the call opened in April. The expectation is that masters and doctoral student, 11th July, those applications, the call will close, and for extension support, 18 August, the call will close. The universities are expected to submit those applications to the NRF by the 4th September, and for extension support, 29 September. The expectation for the NRF is that we would like to announce the outcomes before the end of the year for masters and doctoral as well as extension support applicants. What we are also trying to do, colleagues, with the extension support, we are trying to make sure that this closing deadline for extension support, at least it's extended to somewhere to mid-September, somewhere there. But we should still be able to make those outcomes by the end of the year. But I think after extensive consultations with a number of stakeholders, the view is that the call can still be stretched in terms of the closing to September. So we are exploring that option as well. In terms of the honors application process, we are trying to revert back to the block grant system. Hopefully, once we have had consultations, there will be an announcement on the block grant process. This will mean that by November, October, each university will get its allocation. Say, for instance, colleagues, this is just an example. Nelson Mandela might get, say, 300 awards for honors, for instance, but that number will be known by October, November, for instance. But what we're still trying to explore now is how do we still use the online platform, and how do we make sure that process is optimal, and it will allow university flexibility for them and the NRF for us to be able to approve those students as quickly as they become available. But we think that if we were to reinstitute the block grant process, it will alleviate some of the pressures that we are witnessing under the honors program. In terms of the progress report for continuing and for new students, colleagues, you'll be glad to be informed that The NRF has dealt away with the biannual progress reporting template requirement. So students will only be allowed to submit progress report at the end of towards, I think it's mid-November, all the way to mid-February. That's when they can submit the progress report. But there will be no need for you to submit a progress report by July or August, as we have done in. And in terms of how that the progress report for honor student, it's just it's the certificate of completion, but that goes through the postgraduate or the research office, and there's a tool that can be used by the DAs for the NRF to be notified of that completion. For master student, the expectation is it's the literature review. As part of your progress report, you must report on the literature review. You must report on the proposal that has been approved by the Higher Degrees Committee. You must indicate any academic support service that you have done. The MOU must be signed between the student and the supervisor. Report on the progress report. Any other conference outputs that you might have, manuscript drafted, research completed, and dissertation submitted, if any. This will be more or less the same, also even for PhD students. In terms of the appeals process, colleagues, the appeals process of the NRF falls under either it's procedural or it's scientific. I think the details of this can be found in the framework document. But what is important, colleagues, to remember with an appeals process, you are not submitting, you don't have to submit new information with the appeals process. The appeals process, you just have to highlight and say, I feel that when the review committee was looking at my application, there might not have been expert in my particular discipline, and then you then substantiate why you say that that is so. Or you might feel that there's a particular aspect of my research that was missed by the review committee, and as part of your appeal, you then just highlight that information. But you don't have to come and say, I had forgotten to include the fact that my paper was going to be published in Nature or in Science or whatever the case might be, because you'll be bringing in new information into the appeals process. So the appeals process is not based on you providing new information, but it's strictly on when you submitted your application. What is it that could have gone wrong in terms of procedural or the scientific merit? But the details of that can be found in the call document itself. What is also important, colleagues, to remember is that if for instance your application is going to be reviewed negatively at the university must be able to give you feedback as to why your application was not recommended to the NRF, and you must be furnished with clear and succinct reasons as to why your application was not successful. And because it will be on those bases in which you will decide whether to launch an appeal or not. So it is important to note that if your application is not going to be submitted to the NRF, you must be provided with feedback so that you can decide whether you want to launch an appeal or not. And also what is important to note, colleagues, if your application was submitted to the NRF and it was not funded due to budget constraints, you are not eligible for an appeal, because if you appeal the fact that you are not funded due to budget constraints, as I've shown you in my earlier slide, the situation remains. We still do not have any budget to be able to overturn that decisions. But however, should there be additional money that comes, the NRF will always be flexible in making sure that students that were not funded due to budget constraints will be considered when money becomes available. Or alternatively, if there are other students that are not going to take up the awards, we can then say this award will then be transferred to one or two students, depending on how that process unfolds. And what we are pleading is that if there are students who know that they're not going to take up the scholarship this year, please notify the research office as soon as possible. Because once you notify the research office will be able to notify the NRF, and immediately we can then make that award available to the person who can use it immediately, instead of waiting until the process has closed when we require you to submit the COGs. So we will plead that if you know that you're not going to take up the scholarship, you simply just inform the research office so that that money can be freed and it can be given to another applicant. Again, honors students are not eligible for an appeal process because their applications will not have been reviewed. With that being said, colleagues, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nsango, for that very informative presentation. I think we can proceed with Melissa doing her bit before we can take any questions. Are you happy with that arrangement?
Yes. Let's do it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, I'm Melissa Govender. I'm from the Grants Management and Systems Administration Unit. So today I'm going to be taking you through mostly the online application process, but I'm also going to touch on the review scorecards, the closing dates, as well as the process in general. So you have an idea of the different steps that your application will go through once you submit it. So to start off, let's go into the review scorecards. Now, these review scorecards that I'm going to show you can be found in the framework document. That's part of the call. It's uploaded onto the NRF website, and I did post the webpage address on the chat, but I can do so again later on. But basically, when it comes to the review scorecards, this is how your application will be scored. And here you see the honors scorecard, and you can see that academic merit counts for 40% of your score, completion time for your undergrad degree counts for 40%, and then the priority research area counts for 20%. For the first-time masters, you'll see that academic merit counts for 35%, completion time 15%, priority research area 20%, and then the project outline counts for 30%. When it comes to doctoral, you can see it's basically the same, apart from track record is taken into account, which counts for 15%. Originality of the doctoral study counts for 20%, and then potential impact of the research counts for 10%. Then when it comes to extension support, you can see the scorecard is quite different. We look at progress to date, which counts for 25%. Reasons why the study could not be completed on time counts for 25%. And then the work plan that you provide counts for 50%. Now, you know upfront exactly what the reviewers are going to be looking at when scoring your application. So that's why it's very important for you to go through the framework document and have a look at these scorecards so you can plan your application accordingly. Okay, so moving on to the online application process itself. Firstly, this was the address that I posted in the chat earlier. And on this webpage, you can find all the core documents. So the framework, for example, takes you through eligibility criteria. You'll see the scorecards. You'll see the different scholarships that you can apply to and the related eligibility criteria. You can also see the funding guides. The guides are essentially step-by-step instructions on how to complete your application online. So it has screenshots, it has instructions. So it's very useful that while you are completing your application online, that you have your guide next to you and you can go through it and complete it quite easily. The FAQ is your frequently asked questions. We have the ISFAP consent form. We have the statement of expectations, and that really just outlines the expectations for the NRF, the institution, as well as you as the student. And then we have the list of higher education institutions as well. So first things first, we have a new website called nrfconnect.nrf.ac.za, and this is where you're going to log in or register in order to complete and submit an application online. So you will have to register for an ORCID ID. And this is what you use to sign in. So you can see that if you forgot your password or your ORCID ID, you can click on this link. If you don't have an ORCID ID, you can register here. But we essentially use the ORCID ID to sign in, or you can use your email address, Gmail account, or your Facebook account, which is linked to your ORCID profile in order to log in. Now, for those of you who don't know, your ORCID ID is your unique identifier as a researcher. And it's a 16-digit code that you will be given. So if you were registered on our old system called NRF Online Submission System, you will be automatically logged into NRF Connect with your ORCID profile. If you were not registered on our old system, then you just click on the register icon, and it will take you to this page where you can register a new account. All you have to do is fill in your personal details and click on register. So once you log in, on the left-hand side, you will see the menu. Now, before you start an application, please complete the My Profile section and the My CV section. Under the My Profile section, please upload a certified copy of the ID. This is required for audit purposes. And the reason why we want you to complete these sections before you start an application is that this information is then pulled through to your application, so you don't have to complete it again. And then on the home screen, you'll see the funding opportunities that are available to you. So you'll see the research grants as well as the postgrad funding opportunities that are available. And you can click on the apply icon to start an application. So as you would have heard earlier, that we do have age limitations for each level. So if you are older than the age limitation for that specific level, you will then not see that application. So for example, if you are older than 28, you will not have access to the honors application. So please be aware of that. So once you click on apply and you create an application, this is basically what you're going to see. On the top left-hand side, you see the category funding opportunity that you're applying to, and you also have an application reference number, and that is your unique application reference number. If you have any queries, if you have any problems that you want to log, please remember that when you send an email, please use your application reference number, either in the subject line or as part of your email body. If you do encounter any problems, you can contact support desk at nrf.ac.za and they will assist. So you can see that the application is made up of different sections. You have the sections with a red asterisk. These are the compulsory sections. Now, you have to complete the compulsory sections in order for you to be able to submit your application on the system. The non-compulsory sections, these do not have a red asterisk. You do not have to complete that information. You can see the other columns. Complete is marked by a green tick, and if the section is incomplete, it's marked by a red cross. You can see the date that the section was last updated, and you can click on any of the edit icons in order to edit the sections. So I'm going to start off looking at some of the general sections before I go into the different application templates. So we're going to start off with the financial need sections. There are 3 sections: financial need proof of NSFAS, ISFAP funding, and then household contributor sections. So firstly, when it comes to a financial means test, you have to be a South African citizen and permanent resident. If you are a foreign citizen, you cannot apply to have a financial needs test done. When we talk about financially needy students, these are students with a household income of less than 350,000 Rand per annum. If you would like to have a test done, you have to complete the consent form that's available on the NRF website. You have to then upload it in the financial needs section, and I'll show you that section in a bit. If you were previously supported by NSFAS or ISFAP, you will not undergo another financial needs test. You must attach proof of your previous NSFAS or ISFAP funding to the application instead of requesting another financial means test. So when we talk about a completed ISFAP consent form, it must be co-signed by the household contributors that you have listed on the form, and it must be signed and stamped by a commissioner of oaths. If any of the information is missing, we will see the form as incomplete and you will not undergo a financial needs test. Okay, so this section is the financial need where you upload previous NSFAS or ISFAP funding. So the first question there is straightforward. Have you previously received or are you currently receiving NSFAS or ISFAP funding? You just have to move the toggle. If it's green with a tick, this means that you are currently receiving that funding, and you can then upload the proof to the section. Now, when we talk about proof, many students upload the NSFAS bursary agreement form, which is not signed. And we don't take that as official proof because it is not signed. So what we want in terms of proof is either an official university stamped financial statement, which shows the funds from the funder coming into your account, or a letter from NSFAS or ISFAP, or even the university stating that you have received funding from them previously, or you're currently receiving funding. Okay, so please stick to these types of proof, and you can upload it in this section. The next financial needs section is where you're going to ask for a financial needs test to be done. And here's where you're going to upload the completed consent form. Now, if you have received funding from NSFAS or ISFAP, as I said, you will not undergo another financial needs test. In this case, under this field has a financial means test being done, you're going to say yes. So that means you're going to move the toggle to the right so that it's green. And then you'll see that the other fields disappear. If you want to have a financial means test done, you have to complete combined gross family income field, and these are your options. So as I said previously, the financial means test is only for those with an income of less than or equal to 350,000 Rand per annum. And if you select that, you can move on and complete the other fields. If you select more than 350,000 Rand, you will see that the other fields will disappear because you're not eligible for a financial needs test. And not applicable, this was specifically for those who are foreign citizens who cannot have a financial needs test done. Okay, so if you do want a financial means test done, upload the consent form, click on save, and then you're going to complete the household contributor section, which is the next financial needs section. Basically, what you're going to put in here for those of you who are requesting a financial needs test, the information that's on your form, the information that's on the consent form, you need to duplicate here. So you're going to click on create new, and then you will see this. So here is where you're going to input the household contributor details, the relationship ID number, their name, surname, email address, etc. Once you complete that, it looks something like this. So you can see that you can see the relationship, the details of the person, and whether they're a financial contributor or not. If you want to edit any of the information, you just click on the edit icon. If you want to delete any of the records, you just click on this icon here, the trash can icon. Okay. If you do not want a financial needs test done, all you do is under household contributor, not applicable, you move the toggle so that it's green with a tick. You do not have to add any records onto the next section. So when it comes to the application category section, this is very similar for your honors, masters, and doctoral first-time applications. You will see the first question is, are you or will you be registered as a full-time student? So just a reminder that with the NRF scholarships, it's for full-time studies only. So if you are going to be registered on a part-time basis, then you are not eligible to apply. The next field is where you're going to choose the scholarship. As I said, the framework has a list of the different types of scholarships that you can apply to. So please have a look at the framework in order to select the correct scholarship. Now, just to show you, here I've selected general scholarship, and you see there's no other fields to be completed. You can click on save. In this screenshot, you will see that scholarship linked to NRF funded research was selected, and you see 2 additional fields. Now, the scholarship linked to NRF funded research is very specific. If your supervisor that you are going to be working with next year has an NRF or is applying to for a research grant for next year that has a student component, then you can list your supervisor's information here in terms of application, their application reference number or their grant number. And you can also list the funding opportunity. Now, the reason why this information is important is that when we are screening the applications and it goes for the funding decision process, the applications are separated. So, for example, all those under the TUCA funding instrument will go to that particular funding domain. If you are applying under Centers of Excellence or SACHI, for example, all those will be separated and go to the specific funding domains so that the funding decisions can then be done. So please ensure that the information here is correct. So please speak to your supervisor, find out if they have an NRF research grant with a student component, and you can input the information. Okay, moving on to the honors application. There's one main section that I'll go through, and you can see that here we want the subject and marks. So if you are currently completing your honors degree, you can just put the information that you have thus far. This information from here, the subject and the marks obtained, the average marks will be calculated in this section at the bottom here. So this field is not editable, so you're not going to be able to type in your average marks. It is something that's calculated from the system. You're going to input your, so the institution that you enter here, this is where your application is going to be routed to once you submit your application on the system. You have to enter other information like discipline, anticipated date of completion, completion time for undergrad degree, etc. In this field, indicate what you are currently doing. The options are not applicable, studying, and employed. If you indicate employed here, you will then have to complete this to take up your scholarship. So you cannot be employed and hold the scholarship at the same time. So if you are awarded a scholarship next year, we need to know that you are willing to resign in order to take up the scholarship. So if you indicate employed and you are not willing to resign, we will reject your application. So please take note of that. Then moving on to the master's and doctoral applications. The templates are exactly the same apart from one section, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Your basic information section, this is where you're going to input the institution where you want your application to be submitted to. Your title, this is your project title. It is not your personal title as in Miss, Mr. or Mrs. So please ensure that you enter a project title here. We require a project title because this is pulled through to the granting system. So any applications without a project title for masters and doctoral will be rejected. The next part, and you can select the maximum funding years as well. So for masters, we only fund the first 2 years. The next important section is your degree to be funded section. This is where we ask for information like whether you're currently registered for the degree or not, the date of first registration, whether your master's is going to be upgraded to doctoral. We ask for discipline, and you can see here that indicate what you're currently doing is also in this section, and it is a compulsory field for you to complete. The next important section is the academic achievement section. So this is where we want the information related to your previous degree. So we are aware that many of the applicants are still busy with their previous degree. And so you don't have final marks yet. So like the example I gave, a master's applicant still busy with honors, then you can list the information related to your final year undergrad. Likewise, if you're a doctoral applicant and you're still busy with your master's, then you can list the information related to your honors or equivalent degree. Now, please note that because so many applicants are still busy with their previous degree, we do confirm the GPA for that previous degree upon take-up of the award. So this means that if you are awarded a scholarship and you submit all the signed documentation, but we see that you obtained less than 65% for your previous degree, then your scholarship will be cancelled because you are not eligible for the scholarship any longer. Okay, so please take note of that. The details of research section, this is the section that differs between master's and doctoral. So here the screenshot shows a master's application. You can see this project outline, alignment to national imperatives, and potential impacts. For doctoral, this is what you'll see. There's problem statement and aims and objectives. Now you can see here that all the sections are compulsory. They are all free text as well. While alignment to national imperatives do have drop downs that you can work with, and then there's a justification section. What we want here, especially in problem statement, aims and objectives, and then the project outline for masters, we want a concise overview of the proposed research. Please have research information in this section. Try to stay away from one-liners, and we've also received in the past, we've received like project outline sections with just headings and subheadings. If you submit something like that, we will see your application as not eligible and your application will be rejected. We also expect that you input appropriate literature references in this section. What you can also do is attach your literature references as an attachment to the application. So that's another option. This section is the application support input section. So this is where you're going to invite your proposed supervisor or current supervisor to have input into your application. So what we expect is that for a master's applicant, you can either list your master supervisor, so again, that's your proposed or current master supervisor, or the HOD. Now, you should only choose your head of department as a referee in the section if you have not been allocated a supervisor yet, or you have no idea who your supervisor is going to be. Please only list one person. And then for the doctoral applicants, we want a doctoral supervisor. So that's your proposed doctoral supervisor or current doctoral supervisor. So just to show you how the section works, let me just go back. You're going to click on Create New. Once you click on Create New, there'll be a drop-down for the role. So this is doctoral supervisor. So this was a doctoral application. For masters, you will see two options, master supervisor or head of department. And just a note here, please only indicate one referee. So if the referee does not respond, the institution will not be able to submit the application to the NRF. Now, if you indicate two referees, for example, and only one responds, the institution will also not be able to submit the application to the NRF. So please only select one referee. So you're going to search for the person. If you don't find the person, it will say no data available. You're then going to tick on the box that says user not found, and then you can input your supervisor's details here. If you search for the person and they are part of our database, you'll have to do is select the correct person, and it will automatically fill the section for you. Maybe just to add, it is your responsibility as the applicant to follow up with your supervisor and to ensure that they respond on the system. Now, even if they don't receive an email from the system prompting them to complete the report, all they have to do is log on to NRF Connect, and on the left-hand side menu, they will see that they have a report to complete for you. So please follow up with your supervisor in order for them to complete this section. And then we have the attachment section. Now, different scholarships have different requirements. Therefore, it's very important that you consult the framework document to find out what the required attachments are. For example, if you're applying for a dance scholarship, there is an additional attachment required regarding a motivation. Look at the framework document to find out exactly what you need to attach. If there are required documents and you have not attached all of the required documents, your application will be rejected. And then now moving on to extension support. So when it comes to extension support, it's for current NRF scholarship holders who require either a third year of master's funding or a fourth year of doctoral funding. So the first question there is, will you be registered as a full-time student? The type of scholarship, there's only two choices, master's or doctoral. And then the extension requested for is 6 or 12 months. As Mbulelo said earlier, please ensure that you select the correct number of months. We do have students coming back to us who requested 6 months initially on the application, and after award, they now require 12 months, and it is a strain on the budget. So please consult with your supervisor to ensure that you request for the right number of months. I've added the application support input section here. It works the same as I showed you previously, but I just want to highlight here that for extension support, your supervisor must respond and they must recommend the extension. So if they respond and they don't recommend the extension, then we will reject your application. This is the details of extension section. The first two fields, application grant reference number and value of the grant. This information is pulled from the NRF system, so it's not editable. Then you have to complete the other sections like proposed institution, date of first registration, etc. These sections are all part of the extension support template. You can see that they're all compulsory, and these sections are all free text sections. So all of this has to be completed in order for you to be able to submit your application. And all of these sections are taken into account during the review process. So just to highlight the application closing dates for honors, and it's for those honors who do not require an ISFAP financial means test. It is the 24th, means if you're an honors student and you require a financial needs test to be done, the NRF closing date for institutions to submit to the NRF is the 1st of September. So that's why institutions may put in their own deadlines, because they have to check the applications for eligibility and all the application requirements, and then they have to submit to the NRF. So please take note of any institutional closing dates for honors ISFAP. For first-time masters and first-time doctoral, the closing date is 11 July. And then for masters and doctoral extension support, it's 18th August. So if you start an application and then come the closing date, if you have not submitted by then the system is going to close and you are not going to be able to submit an application. So please make sure you adhere to these dates. And then finally, just to take you through the processes so you understand the different steps your application will go through. So the call opened in April. I've just gone through the various closing dates. Once you submit your application on the system, it is then routed to the designated authority at the institution you have selected. At the institution, the designated authority will screen the application, and for masters and doctoral and extension support, it will undergo a review by review panels at the institution. Then we have separate closing dates for institutions to submit only the eligible applications to the NRF for review. Once we get the applications on our side, the grants team will screen. That means we're checking eligibility and application. And then when we hand over to the funding domains, the funding decisions for masters and doctoral usually takes place around November and December, and then honors, it happens between January and March. Once the funding decisions are done and finalized, outcomes are announced. So for masters and doctoral, we try and get outcomes out in December, and then honors can take place anywhere between January and March. If you are successful, that means you have been awarded a scholarship, you will get an award letter and a conditions of grant document, which will be attached to your application on NRF Connect. If you are unsuccessful, that means your application was eligible, it came through to us, it went through to the funding decisions process, but because of budget constraints could not be awarded, you will then get a regret letter. Now, in terms of the award letter and conditions of grants, you have until a certain date to accept the grant in the system. But before accepting, please make sure that you read through the conditions of grant. It is a contract that you are accepting, and it's a contract between you and the NRF. So if you do not complete the degree for which you were awarded funding, you will become a defaulting student and you will have to pay back those funds received. So please ensure that you understand the conditions of grants. If you don't understand anything, please talk to the designated authority at the institution, because they know and they understand everything regarding the NRF scholarships. And that is it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa, for that very informative presentation, outlining step by step the application process. I think we can, we've tried our best. I think some of the NRF colleagues has also been responding in the chat to the questions that we've been getting. Perhaps if there are any other questions that haven't been answered in the chat, this is your opportunity to unmute yourself and ask your question. Dr. Nsanga and Melissa, can we perhaps take 3 questions at a time before we move on to the next 3? Okay, great. I see you thumbs up. Okay, Petrus Prinsloo, can you proceed with your question, please?
Hi, thank you. I have 2 questions, actually. The first question is that when students have signed the conditions of a grant agreement and all that, and then return that to the university and the NRF, how long after that should they be waiting to expect funds? Because it's the end of May and there are students that haven't received any money yet. And then the second question is the regret letter. How long should we wait until receiving that as well? Because again, it's the end of May and there's been no response or no indication of those letters coming.
Mark, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my first question has been captured by Prinsloo. My second question then would be, I've applied for conversion from partial funding to full funding. My application was justified by the marks that I got for my master's and the fact that I've been funded by NSFAS in my undergraduate. So it's the end of May now. I have not received feedback from NRF, and also my funds have not yet been processed. So I was wondering what's the holdback and when should I expect to hear from NRF?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Azra, I see your hand up. And then after this, we'll give Dr. Nsango, Melissa, or any of the other NRF colleagues an opportunity to respond. Azra.
Good afternoon, and thank you for organizing this session, Research Department. My first question is that the ISKEA has a grant link, and I've been given permission to use that. However, when I look at the funding opportunities, there are different SACHI listed, but ISKEA is not amongst them. What does one do in this situation? And then the second one is, I think I may have missed this because I joined a little bit late, but for students who want to do the continuous studies, I was funded for my master's under the grant link. When doing the application again for PhD, would I qualify in this scenario or would it not be?
Okay, great. Thank you. Melissa or Dr. Nsanko, would you want to respond to Mr. Petrus Prinsloo? I think the first question relates, or both questions relates to the delay in, firstly, the outcomes, and then also the release of funds. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I will respond to that one of the interrupted support and also the upgrade for masters and masters to doctor. And I think Melissa and Katoko, if they are here, then they can respond to the payment and the regret letter. On the issue, Azra, of the interrupted support, I think let's work with the principle of interrupted support, uninterrupted support. Sorry, the whole idea is that if you were funded at honors, an ideal situation is that if you are funded at honors, we must continue to fund you at masters and continue to fund you at PhD. So the NRF's got to be intentional about uninterrupted support. This will be easier, for instance, if you were under, say, SACHI or the COEs, because they will know you and they will have funds reserved for you throughout this whole process. But if it's under freestanding, for instance, the situation is a little bit fluid because it's dependent also on the availability of the budget. So a classical example will be, for instance, if we have, say, money to fund 10 students at the beginning of the year, and say, for instance, and so this will be honor students, 10 honor students that we fund at the beginning of the year. And all of these 10 students, they then progress to masters the following year. And if we were to apply the principle of uninterrupted support, it means that in the next year, because our budget will have remained stagnant, we're not going to have new entrant into the master's program, for instance. And the same thing will go if those 10 students were to be continue to be funded to go to PhD. It means we're not going to have new people coming in or joining between the different levels of study. So even uninterrupted support, it's uninterrupted support as it is, it's also dependent largely on the availability of funds. But we try to prioritize at least 50% of the funds, especially for in the freestanding domain. We try to prioritize at least 50% of the funds should go to people that are going to fall under uninterrupted support. In terms of the upgrade mark, I think if you have submitted all the relevant documentation, that should have been approved, particularly if you had produced proof that you were plus 75 and you also had proof of NSFAS funding. So maybe you can follow that up in meters via your office, and then we can then see where exactly the holdup is. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Nsanko. I think just to respond to that, I think in this particular case, we have been following up several times. I think maybe Melissa can come in here. I'm not sure how frequently do they notify us of the outcomes of these type of requests, but I don't know if it's every second week or every third week, but this particular student has been waiting for quite a long time for his outcome and also for the funds to be released. We will send a reminder if there is in the room regarding the request to convert from partial cost to full cost again to Khotso. Thanks.
Imtiaz, yeah, just to come in there, if the grant was accepted on the system, it's a much longer process because there are many aspects of the system that are being tested still or even being built. If the grant has been, the partial cost of study award has been accepted on the system, on our side, a grant has been created. So now we need to then do an adjustment on the system, change the cost center, change the value, etc. And that adjustments functionality is still not available to us. And that's why we actually have a lot which have not been converted yet. And it's simply because of that. If the grant was not accepted on the system, we have provided outcomes for those, and we submit lists for conversions on a weekly basis. So that's the conversions. In terms of the signed conditions of grants, in terms of what our team is doing, the majority of the funds have already been released on the system. The payments part, that means the payments of those funds from the NRF to the institution, that is the part that is still underway. One of the NRF colleagues did say to me that institutions can start claiming on the system from the 30th of May, which is tomorrow. And even with the regret letter, there was a glitch on the system. So these are all system-related issues regarding the regret letter, and that's why those have not gone out yet from the funding domain side. And then there was a last question, I think, about the SACHI and the choice not being available on the system. If you can please send an email to MTRs, and MTRs, you can forward it to me. I'll have to send it to the relevant funding domain to find out what the choice should be. And then I can advise accordingly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Melissa. And just out of curiosity, I don't know the technical side of things, but is there no way that the NRF can implement a manual process just so that we can get the ball rolling? Because at the end of the day, you know, it's students' livelihoods are at stake. They depend on these scholarship funds for their living expenses. So is there no way that we can follow a manual process, and then just for formality, we then can create the grant on the system at a later stage, just for the NRF to release funds so that we can pay the students? I don't know if that's a possibility.
Good afternoon, if I can jump in here.
Good afternoon.
It's Nkateko speaking. As you are aware that we have paid I think there were 3 batches that have been paid so far while we were following the manual workaround. However, since the system is now almost ready for us or for our financial officers to start with the claims, there's actually no need for the workaround now. So what will happen is we are currently busy capturing all those offline claims that we did for the 3 batches that were paid. Then after we're done with that process, that's when we will open it up for the institutions to now start claiming all the releases that have been made and are not paid. As soon as the claims are submitted or processed, then our finance colleagues will make payments.
No, thanks.
So
thanks
we anticipate this to at least have students paid within this week still, if latest then early next week. But in terms of claims, the system will be open from tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nkateko. I'll inform our finance department about this. But what we've done, we've already advanced funds to our students. But I'll inform the relevant financial officer. But my query was not related to new awards or renewal students. It's with regards to the change in beneficiary. Those are the students that have relocated from other institutions and coming to a foreign city or a different institution that require their funds. So my question is there no manual process, or as you put it, what way around that we can assist these students?
Okay. Change of beneficiary should work on the system, MTS. If there's any challenges around that, maybe you can send me a few examples, but you should be able to process change of beneficiary on the system. In terms of, I had, and I know this was not your question, but one of the colleagues mentioned moving from partial cost to full cost. That is something that we're trying to see whether, if the system is not ready for that, if we can't just proceed, NRF is having engagements to see if there's a way where we can pay for the partial cost, then later stage make proper adjustments, just to add to that. But in terms of change of beneficiary, please forward me the examples that or in instances where you are unable to process the changes.
My apologies, it was related to the conversion between partial cost and full cost, not change of beneficiary. But okay, thanks. I'm glad to hear that the NRF is wanting to find ways to perhaps release the partial cost funding, and then at a later stage do the adjustment. Thanks. Okay.
And here's before we take more questions, there was a question around and I think Melissa answered that, just to clarify with the reject letters, we just needed to complete issuing of award letters. The system is ready for us to start sending out reject letters. So that is something that the colleagues will start doing. If I'm not mistaken, that process can start this week still. Thank you.
Thanks, Nkateko. And I'm sure this is just a different year, and we won't experience this in the future because as many people know, with the new system, there's always some teething problems. So yeah, if we can proceed with, I think it's PC, you may proceed with your question. PC. Okay, I think PC is...
okay, I'm so sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, my name is Lisanda.
Hi, Lisanda.
I wanted to find out, I'm not sure if the question has been covered, but I wanted to find out, let's say for an example, I submit an application for master's studies at, let's say at NMU, and then I apply for NRF via the institution. And then it happens that my application for my studies get rejected. Will that affect my grants application?
Okay, maybe I can answer that quickly. No, it won't affect it. Even if you, so in other words, you're not accepted for admission at Mandela University, but you awarded the scholarship. Is that what you're asking?
Okay, let me make a personal example. I applied for admission at UKZN, and then my application for admission got rejected, of which I think could be wrong. My application for NRF also got rejected, but I got admitted at NMU. But both my applications were rejected.
Okay, no, your NRF application is totally independent. There's nothing to do with your admission application at the institution. But should you, for example, be successful with your NRF application and you apply via NMU and you want to pursue studies at another institution, then you can move the scholarship from NMU to another university.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. And then my last question is that I would like to find out if perhaps there could be an opportunity to appeal for the year 2023 for those that are not funded, or all applications, or all financial related applications for 2023 are closed. There won't be any opportunity opened.
There was an appeal process that was open, but I think that has closed, Melissa.
Yes, that has closed. And it was specifically for those who were not recommended by the institutional review panel.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Azra?
Thank you.
Thank you. Azra, your question? Or was that an old one?
Shukran, Imtiaz. Just to go back to the uninterrupted studies, I just wanted clarity on when the uninterrupted studies was implemented, because in 2020, I was funded under freestanding. In 2020, I also applied then for my master's in 2021, but I was rejected due to NRF not having funds. So it was submitted from my DA to NRF. And upon following queries and so forth, it was then disclosed that they were unable to fund me due to the NRF funds. That is how in 2021, I applied for 2022 and 2023 using the grant link. So I'm just a bit also now wary about the uninterrupted studies, because I did apply, but was rejected in between honors and masters under freestanding. but master's I'm funded under the grant link.
Okay, thank you, Azra. Dr. Nsango can respond to that after we ask Petrus to pose his question.
Hi, thank you. My question this time is regarding the additional funds that may or may not be released later in the year. Would we be able to get an indication of when to expect that? And then also, is there any effect for uninterrupted students with receiving funding potentially at that stage later in the year?
Okay, I don't know if my colleague Melissa, do you understand the question? I don't think, what funds are you referring to, Petrus?
So I'm under the impression that once the accepting of funds for students that receive funds at the beginning of the year, once the accepting of that has reached the deadline, then the money that wasn't accepted by students or that students say they're not going to take because they're not studying or for whatever reason, it gets returned to the NRF and then that gets processed, and at a later stage in the year, the NRF reallocates funds to students that did not receive funding initially. I wanted to ask if there was an indication of when that will be happening this year, because I understand last year that only happened in October. And then my second part of that question is whether, if you're an uninterrupted student, if that has an effect on how you will be looked at in this process.
Okay, I think we'll stick to those two questions first. Azra and Petrus' question, Dr. Nsango, would you like to respond, perhaps?
Sure. Thank you. I think, colleagues, what I was trying to explain was because if we work with the principle of how uninterrupted support works, then we will understand the different modalities that can be applied to it. You know, uninterrupted support doesn't mean that if you are funded at an honors, automatically you will get an award at a master's level and at a PhD level. There are modalities, even when you move from honors to masters, there are certain things that has to be checked. And like I've said, for instance, let me just make a very practical example. I have made an example about the availability of funds being one of the things that can act as an impediment in you not being funded under uninterrupted support. Say, for instance, you now have 100 students that are only in the discipline of microbiology, for instance. So because we have to maintain disciplinary spread, those are the things that we will then look at. Also, it could be, but this is not possible, it could be that all of these students, and I'm going to use NMU as an example, all of the students that are eligible for uninterrupted support are all coming from NMU, you see. So do we only concentrate our money in that basket? No. There are many other factors that have to be factored in when we consider uninterrupted support. But as I've indicated, at least 50% of our funds gets to be distributed to people that are funded under uninterrupted support. In terms of, to the question as to when did this start, it became the official policy of the NRF when we introduced the new policy. Before then, it was just happening as and when it was happening. But with the introduction of the new PG policy of the NRF, that then became part and parcel of the policy of the NRF. But it's not a question of, I was funded at honors level, I'm going to be funded at a master's level. It doesn't work like that. There are many dynamics, as I've indicated in my other slides, things that you have to consider when a person has to be funded. There are a lot of dynamics there. To your question, Prinsloo, yes, you are correct. One of the things that we do consider when we do additional awards later in the year, we also consider the fact that there are those students that were funded by the NRF previously, but they could not be funded in the first round. So such student will be prioritized when we do the additional awards that we do later in the year. But it's going to be more or less the same modality when we do that. We don't just go in there and say, you have 100 students that were funded previously who might possibly fall under uninterrupted support. You have to check, where are these students coming from? Imagine if only those students were coming from Pretoria, for instance, but they are all eligible for uninterrupted support. Do you fund them? Obviously, it's not going to augur well if all of those students were coming from one university, concentrated in one discipline. So it's all of those dynamics that have to be applied. If all of those students, for instance, were international students, but the NRF policy stipulates that it must be 5%. So there is a nice balancing act that must happen when we do determine that. To the question that says, when are we going to do the additional awards? We always aim to, you see, one of the things that is there is because how we set up the timelines, we then say that the last date for submission of the COG is end April, but there has been an extension that has been granted to end May. So when there are these extensions, it simply just affects the process downstream. But we are hoping that at least this year, by July, we will have an indication as to how many additional awards are we going to make, how much money do we have that is available for us to make those additional awards. So anything between July and August, we should be able to start that process. And we will be in touch with the respective universities and research offices as we undertake that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nsango. Hope, can you proceed with your question, please?
So what I would like to be clear about is that if you are applying with if you are applying for NRF funding, even though you are applying at many different institutions, and even if you don't get accepted by the institution you've applied with, you are still going to receive funding with.
Hope, are you there?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Can you maybe just speak up a bit? We can't hear you. So
Okay.
are you saying that if you don't get accepted by the university through which you had applied for funding, will you still receive the funding? Is that your question?
Yes, I just wanted to be clear about that.
Yes, I addressed this earlier. Yes, you would still receive the funding if you are going to be accepted at another higher education institution and registered at that university. So if you're not accepted at NMU, but you're accepted, for example, at UWC, you can transfer your funding from NMU to UWC. Of course, there's a process that the NRF have in place, but that will get to if you ever find yourself in this situation. But it is possible that you can still receive the funding as long as you're registered at another university.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Hope. Okay, Ashlumile and Jacqueline. Ashlumile first.
Greetings. I posed a question on the chat, but no, I haven't gotten a response. The thing is, I'm currently pursuing my my advanced diploma this year, so I've applied for funding. For honors for the next year at my institution. Now I am currently under a contract for an internship. And I saw when Miss Melissa was doing her presentation on the application process, it requires that if a person is employed, they have to forfeit employment for the scholarship. So does it also does the same rule apply on a contract of the internship that it is a fixed contract of 2 years? It's ending next year, at beginning of the year. So what's the dynamic with a contract like that of an internship?
Okay, thank you, Ashlumile. Jacqueline, your question?
Okay, so my question is, so I'm an international student, right? So I wanted to ask, since there's been a topic on limited funds that the NRF has, so I wanted to ask you, when I'm applying, is it much more better for me to apply for as a first-time doctoral student or under NRF Minds? Because the NRF Minds also is for international students that are not South African. So I wanted to ask, for me to get a better chance of in terms of considering the limited funds, which one would you advise me to apply for? Should I apply under general first-time doctoral or under NRF mines? The other question that I have is, I'm currently my first year PhD, but I'm not sure if you're aware of this, because sometimes when you register after March, you can still be registered as a student, but your first year will only start next year. So yes, I'm in the system, I'm registered as a PhD student, but my first year will only start count next year. So I wanted to ask, when I'm applying for NRF, do I apply as first time doctoral student considering 2024, or this year will be my first time? So I wanted to ask that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jacqueline. I think, Melissa, you'd be able to respond to all three questions. The first being,
Yes.
maybe we can, Jacqueline's. Okay, you proceed, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the internship, we see that as employment, and even it's part of the conditions of grant as well. So you can't be part of an internship and hold a scholarship at the same time. So you'll have to choose between the two. In terms of an international student and where to apply, that's really up to you to decide. You need to look at the scholarships and you need to decide what suits you, because mines is also quite specific. I think also with mines, I'm hoping, Mandela, maybe you can help, just correct me here. But for mines, a student should not be in South Africa at the time of application. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And then in terms of the third question, first year PhD, and you said that you'll only be, your first year will only be next year. Am I right in saying that if 2023 is your then pre-proposal year?
My program doesn't have a pre-proposal year, but then if you want to be in the system of the school, you can still, because I registered after that registration, I can still be a student, but my first year will only start be counted the following year.
Okay, so we go according to the proof of registration provided. So if your proof of registration indicates that 2023 is your first year, then you will only be eligible for 2 years of funding under doctoral. However, if the proof of registration indicates that 2024 is your first year, then you will be eligible for 3 years of doctoral funding. So it all depends on what the proof of registration says.
Okay, thank you.
Can I maybe just come in here, Melissa? So in the research office, we do those checks when we validate applications to NRF. So in your application, for example, if you state in your application that 2024 is going to be your first year, we would then, as our feedback to you, inform you to make that change and say it's going to be your second year, because we check the internal systems when you actually registered for the first time. So if you registered prior to the June 2023, even though it does not constitute as your first year because you registered after the deadline date for registration, the NRF still would consider it as your first year of registration. So when you submit your application for funding next year, in your application, if there's a section that asks what year will you be in 2024, you should indicate second year of PhD. Fortunate? Do you understand?
Okay.
Sorry, it's Jacqueline, sorry.
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Melissa.
Let me just, I think just to that point that Melissa was making, for if you are going to apply for mines, you need to be outside the SA at the time of application. We are considering a different modality around mines, but as things stands now, our agreement with the Nelson Mandela Foundation was that we want to attract students that are coming outside of South Africa, so that when they complete their PhD, then it will be easier for them to be able to go back. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That's clear. Thanks, Dr. Nsindo. I think we should be wrapping up in the next 2-3 minutes. There's just one hand that's raised. Fortunate, can you ask your question, please?
Thank you. So I have two questions. One I had raised earlier, and it's around the eligibility because I applied last year for doctoral support, and I didn't receive it, and I never got a rejection letter to understand for me why I couldn't get funding, and my master's marks were like 97.5%. So which made me wonder if maybe we can understand, because I'm coming from a literature background, where maybe when you see the call, you feel like it's open to everyone, but at the same time, it feels like the priority is around people who are like hard sciences based. Because even some of the questions when you're filling out the form, they don't necessarily always apply to you as a literature student, maybe pursuing something like sexuality, pleasure. So I just want to know, so that we know as people coming from like literature background, if maybe NRF doesn't take our studies as serious as we take them seriously. Because Terry Adams can assure you, I kept doing a follow-up to her from early January. My proposal was already done by the 28th. The first draft was already done by the 28th of February this year, just to show that I'm a serious student, I'm an effective student. As I've told you that my master's was like 97.5%. I take my studies very seriously. But like you get this pushback from NRF where it's like, okay, maybe is it because I'm not coming from botany, or I'm not a law student, or I'm not whatever student. So I just want to know if NRF does take literature as serious in the country, as literary studies is something that contributes to the visions and missions of the country. And the second question is around, I would like to try again, but it would be very important for me to get my rejection letter from NRF so that I know going forward for the 2024 application, I know what I did wrong. And if they say, no, it's budget constraints, I would also like to find out if you have a student who passed their master's at 97.5 and you choose to fund a student who passed their degree at 70% just because they are doing hard sciences, please explain to me what's eligible in that point and what's not eligible, because we study hard thinking the more I study hard is the more I'll be appeasing for scholarships. And then turning 30 this year in November, and I saw that like for doctoral, it says 32. I would like to know that does someone like me who's turning 30 this year in November, but in 2024, they'll be turning 31. Do I qualify to apply for a doctoral support in 2024? So those just two questions around, do you take literary studies very seriously, or are you just looking for hard sciences? Two, is my age still matter since I'm turning 30 this year while I'm not funded and applying for 2024 when I'll be 31? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fortunate. NRF colleagues?
Yep, thank you, Fortunate, for that question, and congratulations on your 79.5 pass mark. Look, the NRF documents and also the strat plan of the organization is quite clear. The NRF is not a science-based focused organization, but the NRF is being ushered by different strategies and visions that exist in the country, and how do we want to influence the national system of innovation. And in doing that, there are multiplicity of things that ought to be considered. So all the disciplines are important to the NRF. For instance, as I've mentioned in my presentation, when you go and you talk to the colleagues from SASOL in terms of what is it that they fund, they will be specific in saying, we want students in the following disciplines, and they will be interested in students that are doing chemistry, green, and so on. When you go and talk to the colleagues from Germany in DART, they will say that we are happy that you find students in the STEM disciplines as well as social science and humanities. When you go to colleagues from the National Skills Fund, they will be specific in the disciplines that they want the NRF to fund. And these disciplines will be linked to the list of occupations in high demand, and also to support the National Skills Development Act. When you talk to the colleagues from the Department of Science and Innovation, they will say that we can fund all the students, STEM as well as social science and humanities. But our particular focus will be on priority research areas, and they will outline exactly what those priority research areas are. So the NRF doesn't place priority over another discipline. That's not what we do. But what we try to do is to absolutely to make sure that there's equal distribution of funds across the system, not focused in one university, not focused in one discipline. I mean, if I just share with you the statistics for the students that were funded by the NRF for the 2021 academic year, 20% of those awards were given to students in the arts, humanities, as well as social science, while about 68% went to the students that are in the STEM disciplines, and the remaining went to business science and commerce. So this shows you that the NRF is not only just focused on the science disciplines or the medical field disciplines. As I've mentioned in my presentation, it's not only just the issue of academic performance that is important to the NRF, but there are multiplicity of things that must be considered. When you fund a student, you then say, is the student Black? Is the student female? Is the student disabled? Is the student financially needy? In what disciplines are they coming from? In what university are they coming from? In what area are they coming from? All of those things. You also look at the need of the partner, the need of the funding partner themselves. So in other disciplines, for instance, you get an oversubscription, and in other disciplines, you don't get an oversubscription. And remember, when the NRF makes these awards, we don't go into granular detail for each university. But what we try to do, we try to apply systems thinking to then say, have we equally distributed our awards across the universities? Have we have a nice spread of the disciplines across all the universities? Do we have a nice spread of students that are being funded at international students across the disciplines? So the process that is undertaken to make funding decisions, especially for the freestanding, which is the unit that I manage, it's quite a very cumbersome attention to detail process. It doesn't only just look at the fact that you obtained 100%. It could be that you obtain 100%, but you are not financially needy, but you could be considered as an academically excellent student. But there could be 1,000 more students that have performed like that, but there could be other things there that might make those students not to be eligible for support. As I've indicated, I think one of the biggest impediment that we are sitting with as the NRF is the issue of budget constraints. I think colleagues will be aware. I mean, in 2017, for instance, we were receiving from one of our funding partners close to $250 million. And after the fees must fall in 2018, that funding was slashed to around 100 million. So you see, we lost about 150 million as a result of things that were happening in the system. And it will be very difficult for us to recover that money. As a result of the COVID-19, for instance, two of our partners pulled out because they said that they were having financial pressures, so they could not continue to fund students. So the question rather then is, what is the NRF doing to make sure that students like yourself, Fortunate, with your excellent track record and all of these other things that you have, how do we make sure that we fund those? And the only way in which we can do that is if the NRF was to able to go out and to garner more financial support. We will be making a presentation in 3 weeks' time to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee to make a business case for additional funding. We have submitted a request of close to about 800 million to the National Skills Fund. I have received news that this might be considered. I'm going to meetings next week with Telkom to fund students in the ICT sector. In 2 weeks' time, I'll be meeting one of the largest foundation, formerly the BP Foundation, also to explore, funding of students. But one of the other things that is also important, it's the trajectory in which the country is going, and the policies that are there. For instance, for DSI, the Department of Science and Innovation, what is important currently, and this is captured in our framework document, is that there must be research that is being undertaken in the country must be seen to be supporting disciplines that are outlined in the decadal plan. And if you look at the decadal plan, it is about 13 disciplines that are there. And if you look at those 13 disciplines, the NRF has also taken a decision to say we cannot fund all of these disciplines that are outlined there. Perhaps we can zoom into a few of those disciplines. And the reason why the NRF wants to do that, it's only because of budget constraints. As I've shown in my other slide, was that we have about 180,000 students that are registered across all the universities in the country. And the NRF can only fund about 6,000 of the 180,000 students that are there in the country at a postgraduate level. So these are the things that are there. I mean, if you look, just zoom into PhD, for instance, you have enrollment of close to 29,000 PhDs, but the NRF can only fund 2,000. At masters, you have enrollment of close to about 80,000. The NRF can only fund 3,000 of those. So you can see, in terms of the absorptive capacity and the demand for it, these things are not talking to each other. In terms of the eligibility for PhD, certainly you will be eligible for PhD because the cutoff is 32. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nsango, for that very extensive explanation. I'm sure fortunate, please to apply again for funding for next year. I think we should wrap up, but if you don't mind, Dr. Nsango, I just have a few questions related to the ad hoc application process. I know this year we're still awaiting outcomes. The timeline that you've proposed in your presentation was that we can expect outcomes towards the end of March, I think, for the first semester call, and the end of September or mid-September for the second semester. Do you know when we can expect outcomes for this year's call? And then you also mentioned that the applicants will have to apply online. So how would us as DAs filter who can actually access an application and who can't? If it's, I understand it's a closed call, but if I understood you correctly, you said that they needed to apply online on the system. And then the last question related to the ad hoc application process. I think in your presentation you spoke about students that may be eligible for full cost study. They must produce proof that they're financially needy. So are students that meet the academic criteria, would they also be considered for full cost, or is it just financially needy students? This is for the ad hoc application process. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. In terms of the ad hoc process, yes, if say for instance, when those students apply, remember, they will indicate that they have plus 75. So immediately they will then qualify for full cost of study if their application is successful. What I was highlighting there was that one of the additional criteria for full cost of study is that you must be financially needy. In the event that they don't get 80%, then they must produce proof that they were financially needy, or those that are disabled, students living with a disability, will have to indicate and then attach proof. So those ones, if they were to come with proof and also the plus 75 and student with disability, automatically they will be eligible for full cost of study. But if a student is going to apply and they don't have a plus 75 and they are not sure whether, or they don't have proof that they were funded by ISFEP or NSFAS, then we will fund them at partial cost of study. But then later on, we will give them an opportunity for us to assess them. If they are successful and we find that they're financially needy, we will then upgrade them in the next academic year. In terms of the outcomes for the call that is now out, For masters, doctoral, and extension support, the outcomes will be out before we close. So we are hoping by between the 20th December and the 23rd of December, those outcomes will be out. And then for honors, as I've said, things might change slightly, because if we give you the block grant, it means that you will manage the process yourself. So you will then deal with, as and when the students come, then you will approve the student. But it's something that I think once we have had consultations, we will then be clear as to how that is going to roll out. But the honors process will change. We might give you guys a block grant, and then when we give you the block grant, clearly, then we can't be approving students in March, in April, especially if you have a block grant. In terms of the close call process for the ad hoc, what we expect there is we might expect, as an example, a SACHI supervisor, for instance, to say, I have identified Mbulelo and Priscilla as my student. So already the such supervisor will know the student. And then what the such supervisor must do is then to liaise with you to say, I have these two students, Mbulelo and Priscilla, and here are the ID numbers. I've recruited them. They've agreed to join my group. And then you will then consolidate all of those ID numbers across Nelson Mandela. And then once you have done that, you will then liaise with your NRF contact person and then advance them those ID numbers. What we will do as the NRF, we will then link only those students to the postgraduate call, either in January or in July. So only those students will be able to see the call, because it will only be them that are linked to that. And then once they have completed submission of the thing, when they submit, you will also only see those students, for instance, for Nelson Mandela, for instance, and then you will do the screening, and then we submit to us, and then we proceed. Again, the point that I've made, please do not review those applications, because we understand that the review process also takes a little bit long. So for these students, we have reached a compromise that we will rather accept the approval of their high degrees committee, because their research proposal will have been reviewed or is going to be reviewed by the higher degrees committee. So when they submit proof that they were successful, when they were being reviewed by that committee, we will then take that their proposal will also, because the two will be almost the same. Their proposal will have been successful at the university. So the NRF will then consider that when we do the funding decisions. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I know we're running out of time, Dr. Nsango, but you've hit on a point about regarding proposal approval, and on that basis you can award a student. But remember, if at most institutions, including Nelson Mandela University, a master student is given, I stand to be corrected, about 6 months to defend a proposal, and PhD student a year. And we are opening the school in January. So with outcomes to be expected by the end of March. So on what basis would the NRF award a student? What information would they be required to submit? Is it also a proposed project?
Yes. So it's going to be a proposed project, but this will be similar to what they will submit eventually to the higher degrees committee. And that approval can be submitted when they submit the progress report in November. If, for instance, there is going to be big changes between what was approved by the higher degrees committee. Let's say, for instance, the higher degrees committee might sit in August, for instance, but then the student was approved in March by the NRF. So what we will then request for that particular student is then for them to submit a request for change in terms of the proposal, if there were diametric changes to the proposal that was submitted to the NRF, because the two things, remember, must align, and also in terms of the progress report that the student must submit to the NRF. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think I didn't expect us to utilize a full 2 hours. I'd like to thank all the participants. I see we had almost 250 at one point. We're down to 65. Probably most of them had to go grab a bit of something to eat. But thank you to the participants, and on behalf of all the participants, the research office, and the community, NMU community at large, we'd like to take this opportunity in thanking the NRF colleagues for availing themselves and for sharing the invaluable information related to the NRF's postgraduate funding model and application processes. So thank you, Mbulelo, Melissa, and other NRF colleagues in Kateko as well, for making yourself available. Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks and cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.